Row operations in the Gauss-Jordan elimination method. You may have noticed that many of the videos that I've created go right along with the using technology sections. They're often located at the end of various parts of your textbook. And this video is no different, but I'm going to take a moment and encourage you to specifically look at the using technology part of your textbook along with this video. I'm going to do one example. Your textbook does a nice job of adding some additional information to what we're doing here. What we're going to do is something that is going to replace some of the arithmetic for you in the Gauss-Jordan elimination method, and that's usually where most people have trouble. If you can determine the correct row operations to use and kind of that sequence of row operations, then the next big difficulty is the arithmetic. And there's a lot of arithmetic, a lot of negative signs potentially, and it's very easy to make little mistakes. And all it takes is one little mistake to throw the entire problem off. That says one, you should, whatever answers you're getting, be checking them back into the original problem to make sure that they do work, just in case you've made such a mistake. And number two, it says that it'd be nice if the calculator could do some of this arithmetic for us. And it can if we go through and do it on a kind of operation by operation basis. But it turns out that the calculator knows how to work with matrices, and it can actually do entire row operations for you all at once. And that's the purpose of this video, is to take a look at those row operations. Now, this is not an easy thing to do in the calculator. I don't think these row operations have been designed in a way that's easy to remember them. So if you do choose to use them, make sure you get lots of practice with them and you understand exactly how they work. This video is going to go through one problem and give you a little bit of a flavor for how they work, and then you can choose from there, and based on the information again in your textbook, whether this is something that you want to pursue in more depth and get more practice with. So we have the single example here where we're asked to solve the given system of linear equations with 2x plus 3y equals 16 as the first equation, and x minus 5y is equal to negative 5 as the second equation. This is the same system that we looked at in the previous video. But now we're going to solve it using the Gauss-Jordan elimination method. So our solution begins with the augmented matrix, and that has already been written here. And then we go through a series of row operations. And it turns out it's going to take us 4 row operations to work our way through the solution. And what I'd like to do is work our way down through these row operations and do them all on the calculator. Alright, so the first thing we're going to need to do is work with matrices on the calculator. You may have worked with matrices before, so the first thing I'm going to encourage you to do is to remove your previous matrices. And to do that, we need to press the second key on the calculator and the plus key, which above it in the same color as your second key says mem, and that stands for memory. Alright, and you'll see that there's option number 2 is for memory management and deleting. That's what we're going to go into. Just a couple of quick notes here while we're here. Option 3, clear entries. We've talked a little bit about using the second and the enter key to get back to previous entries, things that you've already typed into the calculator for editing them. This clears out the calculator's memory of all those entries. Number 4, clear all lists, is a shortcut for clearing out all of the information and all of the statistical lists that you may have used at some point. So that's a nice shortcut as well. And 7, reset, will allow you to reset a number of different settings in the calculator back to their normal or default settings. It doesn't wipe out memory or anything like that, but it does reset the calculator kind of to its normal or default state. But anyways, we're interested in number 2, so let's press 2. And it's going to give a list of all sorts of different things that we have in memory. We're going to be specifically interested right now in matrices, so we're going to choose option 5 for matrix. And what we'll see here is a listing of any matrices that we currently have stored in memory. All right, and it looks like I don't have any. If you do have some, what you can do is press the delete key. Highlight them, press the delete key, and that will remove them from the calculator screen. All right. Once you have removed any existing matrices that you may have, what we're going to do is press second and the x to the negative 1 key, which above it in the same color as your second key says matrix, and that will take us to the matrix menu. And here I have a listing of matrices. It turns out I believe we can do 10. If I had information in a matrix, it would give a size for the matrix out here. It might say 2 by 3 or 3 by 4 or 10 by 10 or something like that. The fact that these all are blank next to them tells me that these are all empty matrices. All right. If you didn't delete all your matrices and you have used some, you may see some information here. But again, I wanted to clear things out to make this demo, this video, as clear as possible. So what we're going to do is we need to create a matrix, and we need to create this augmented matrix. So we need to go over to the Edit menu. So you can either cursor to the right twice or cursor to the left once to get to the Edit menu. You'll notice it looks exactly the same as the Names menu, and that can be a source of confusion. You need to keep in mind, are you trying to do something with a matrix, or are you trying to change the entries in a matrix? If you're trying to do something with the matrix, you use the Names menu. If you're trying to change entries in a matrix, it's the Edit menu. So we're going to edit. I'm going to choose 1. We're going to make this matrix A. The first thing it does is ask us for a size. The size is going to be the number of rows by the number of columns. So our augmented matrix has 2 rows and 3 columns. For the work you're doing initially anyway, your augmented matrix should always have one more column, than rows, because it has that extra column of constants. You notice the calculator changes the shape of the matrix here. If you're dealing with larger matrices, you may have to use the cursor keys to move around. The calculator will not always show you all of a matrix, but it is all there. Let's enter our values here. So we have 2, we'll enter that. 3, enter. 16, enter. You'll notice that the calculator, when you press enter, goes across rows. So you enter an entire row, and then when you're done, it'll drop down to the next row. So our next row is 1. We can press enter. -5, and we can press enter, and then another -5. And just waiting for my calculator to catch up here. All right, when you are done, and mine should be done here shortly, you're going to want to press the second key and the mode key for quit. We need to quit out of the editing mode once we have everything in the calculator. And there, I finished mine, and I will press second and mode to get quit, and we'll quit back out to our regular screen. Now, as we go from the augmented matrix and start working on it, we notice that the upper left-hand entry is a 2. And in our pivoting process, that is going to be our first pivot element, and we need to make it a 1. So we can make it a 1 by multiplying it and the entire row by its reciprocal. In other words, we need to take 1/2 of row 1 and put that in the place of row 1. So I've already done that here mathematically, so that we see that we end up with 1, 3/2, and 8. Off to the right here, I have what we're going to enter using the calculator. So if we press the second key and the x to the -1 key again, or the inverse key that's often called, what we need to do here is go to the math submenu of the matrix menu. And we have a lot of different options here. What I'm going to recommend you do is cursor up to look at the bottom of the menu. And you'll see here options E and F are times row and times row plus, which is what I'm using here. The other row operation that you have is row swap, which we don't do very often, but is one of the 3 row operations you have, and the calculator does have it. So C, E, and F are the choices you're going to be interested in. Right now, we're just multiplying a row by a constant and then replacing the row. So we're going to choose option E and press enter. So that brings up times row. Now what we need to do is we need to put in what we're going to multiply the row by. So in this case, it's 1/2. All right, so we enter that into the calculator. Then we put a comma. The comma key is right above the 7 on your keypad. Then we need to tell it that we're working with matrix A. So we're going to press second, and we're going to go into the matrix menu. And now we just want the name. We're not trying to edit the matrix here. We're just trying to tell it this is what we're going to work with. So we'll choose option 1. Then I press comma. And then we need to know which row in matrix A we're going to multiply by 1/2. In this case, we're working with row 1. So we'll press 1. We'll close parenthesis. And then what I'd like to do is store this for later use in a different matrix. So I'm going to choose to store it into matrix B. So I'm going to press the store key down the left-hand side of the calculator. press second and that inverse key to get the matrix menu, and I'm going to pick matrix 2. All right, I'm going to press enter. We'll get the answer here in decimal, but I think we can easily see that the first row is correct: 1, 1.5, or 3/2, and 8. If you want to see this in fractions to verify, you can press math, press enter twice, and that will take all of the entries and convert them from decimal to fraction when appropriate. So we can see that we get exactly the same answer that I did working by hand. All right, that matrix is now matrix B. So what we want to do in our next step is we want to take, in our pivot operation, we need to make the 1 in the second row as 0. Now that we have our pivot element 1, all other entries in the same column have to be 0. So in this case, that's the only such entry is the 1 in the second row. So if we take row 2 and add the opposite of row 1 to it, that'll give us a 0 there. But we also need it to do for all of the positions, and the row operation that I have here to the right will do that. So let's try that row operation. We're going to press second and inverse key to get the matrix menu. We're going to cursor over to the math submenu. Then we're going to cursor up, and just doing that once we get times row plus. All right, so we're going to press enter. Now the thing we're going to multiply by, that always comes first in these operations, is -1. Then we need to tell it the matrix we're going to work with. Well, we're now working with our new matrix, which is matrix B. So I'm going to tell it second in the inverse key to get to the matrix menu. I'm going to tell the calculator to work with matrix B this time, because that's my most current version of the matrix. Then I put another comma, and I want to tell it the row that I'm going to multiply by the constant. And then I'm going to tell it the row that I'm going to add to that result, and that is also going to be replaced. It's kind of a little bit backwards of the row notation that we typically use just as we're writing things out, and that's part of what I think makes it difficult to learn, especially at first. All right, we'll close that. That's everything we need to do a times row plus operation, and I'm going to store that into matrix C. I'm not going to change matrix A. That's my original augmented matrix, and I'm going to choose not to touch that. So I'm going to store this into matrix C. And the reason I'm choosing different matrix names is so if in case I make a mistake on a step, I haven't overwritten a matrix and have to go back to the beginning and redo everything. So I'm always going to try to have a matrix which has my most recent result in it, and a matrix which has the immediately preceding result in it, so that if I do make a mistake and I catch that right away, it's easy to go back and fix. So we press store, we press second and the inverse key, and we choose option 3 for matrix C. We'll press enter. We get it back in decimal. Again, if we press math and choose option 1 and press enter again, it'll give it to us in fraction form, and we can see that the answer we have on the calculator, which is currently in matrix C, agrees with the hand work that I did previously here. All right, so we've completed the first pivot operation. Now we need the second pivot operation. So we go to the second row, second column entry, -13/2, and we need to make that a 1. We do so by multiplying by the inverse, or -2/13. All right, so that gives us our next row operation. -2/13 times row 2 is going to replace row 2. Let's use our times row function to do that. So we're going to press second, go into the matrix menu, and we're going to go to the math menu. We're going to cursor up, and we're going to choose item E times row. All right, we give it the constant that we're going to multiply by, in this case -2/13, so -2 divided by 13, comma. Then we're going to tell it the matrix we're working on. Well, the last matrix we stored anything into is C, so we want to operate on that matrix now. So we're going to go into the matrix menu and choose option 3. And then we're multiplying the previous row 2 and replacing it, that row 2, with the result. So we're interested in row 2. We'll close this off. And I'm going to store back into matrix B. You could also go to D and keep working your way down. I typically, once I get started, move back and forth between B and C. So I'm going to press second, matrix, and I'm going to choose option 2. I don't really care much if I overwrite these once I've gotten started. It's the original A that I really don't want to overwrite. And the second row now becomes 0, 1, and 2, and we can see that matches up with the work that I've already done on paper. So we're almost done. Our second pivot element is a 1, and we're only going to have 2 pivot elements here since we only have 2 rows. We need to make the other entry in the column 0, so we need to turn the 1.5 into a 0. So we take row 1 and add the opposite of that 1.5, or the opposite of 3/2 times our pivot row, row 2, and that's going to replace row 1. So here's our row operation. Row 1 plus a negative 3/2 times row 2 is going to replace row 1. In the calculator, we have the times row plus operation you see here. So let's do that. Second, matrix. We're going to go over to the math menu, cursor up, choose times row plus. We're going to give it the constant that we're using to multiply by first, so the negative 3 divided by 2, negative 3/2, comma. The matrix we're going to work on, we stored the last result in B, so we want to work with B. So we'll go into the matrix menu, choose option 2, comma. All right, we're going to multiply the negative 3/2 by row 2. That's our pivot row. And we're going to add the result of all of that multiplication to row 1 and replace row 1. So that's the last thing that we enter in here. All right, then we're going to press store. And I'm going to store into matrix C, since it's the last time I stored into matrix B. And I'll press enter. And I get 105012. All right, all my pivoting is done here. If we read this augmented matrix, we see that x is equal to 5 and y is equal to 2. And we showed in the previous video, and you can double check in this case as well, that those results are exactly what we're looking for this system of equations. And if I can cursor back up here, we'll note that 2 times 5 is 10, 3 times 2 is 6, 10 plus 6 is 16. We'll have x is just 5, minus 5 times 2 is a negative 10, 5 minus 10 is negative 5. So those results definitely work. It's up to you whether you choose to use these row operations in the calculator or not. Again, they're kind of difficult. I personally don't like to use them. I think it's easier to work with them, all this stuff by hand, but I'm also a math teacher, and I'm very accustomed to doing this. I have a lot of practice with it. So choose what you're most comfortable with and use that.